Hey there, CNFers, my CNF buddies. Hope you're having a CNFing great start to the new year. January 1 is just like any other day, but we as a culture have assigned supreme import to that day. It's alright. If you're coming here for the first time because your resolution is to listen to more podcasts, or you want to kickstart projects in the genre of creative nonfiction, then let me tell you the deal. This is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Hello. The show where I speak with the world's best artists about creating works of nonfiction, leaders in the world of narrative journalism, documentary, film, radio, essay, and memoir. And I try to tease out habits, routines, and origins so that you can use their tools of mastery in your own work. I'm your host, Brendan O'Mara. How's it going? For episode 83 of the podcast, I had the distinct pleasure of speaking with Victoria Stopp. You can find her on Twitter at Victoria Stopp. That's Stopp with 2 P's, or at her website, victoriastopp.com. Her book, Hurting Like Hell, Living with Gusto, My Battle with Chronic Pain, published by McFarland, tells the story of how she became mired in chronic pain after a traumatic neck injury. The book goes into great detail about her journey and how low and powerless it made her feel, but ultimately, she came out of it. Spoiler alert, she's here to talk about it. In this episode, we also talk about her being super disorganized, something I echo with her, and how we kind of overcome that. Finding solitude, how writing keeps pulling Victoria back even after she gave it up, and a whole lot more. So you dig the show? If you do, share with a friend and consider subscribing. I ask that you leave an honest rating or review on iTunes as well. Ratings take 5 seconds, reviews about a minute, depends how much effort you want to put into it. 2018 is all about growth, and having ratings and reviews help with visibility and validation, of course, and people come to it and see that and they'll want to check it out so we can kind of build this community a bit more. But you know, if you're tired of me being a blowhard right now, how about let's just do the show? How's that sound? Hit it. Given that it's the new year, and I kind of started this last year at about this time, just asking this question of a few people through the first 6 weeks of the year, I'm always interested in how people are processing the new year, so they can set their year up to, to be, I don't know if better than the last one is the right word, but just something that, you feel like you're coming at the year with renewed vigor. And I wonder how you're processing that as you go forward in 2018.
Truthfully, I've had the flu since the last day of 2017, so that has messed up everything. I had these grand plans, and one of them was my first bookstore event in Alabama that was supposed to have happened a couple days ago, and at that point I couldn't even leave the house. So that the illness has restructured everything, but because of that, I was hoping I could use some of the sick time to be at my house and just like thinking things through and making these fabulous plans. But as it's turned out, I've been too sick to really even think. So my new year's kind of starting about yesterday, which is okay. I mean, I'm not dead, so, it could be worse. But right. I really, my plans for the new year are just to get as much attention and visibility in terms of my book as possible, because I know that we all are, susceptible to becoming yesterday's news very quickly. And so since my book was published at the end of the year, it just came out, but in a way it could be already a bygone because it's a previous publication year. So this is the year that I find out if I won any of the awards I applied for. This is the year that I really go on tour with it rather than just the couple of events I did last year. So right now, I've been spending a lot of time getting the calendar together and making sure that I can still do all the things I need to do, that nothing's getting scheduled on the same day, and also, leaving enough flexibility so that if reporter's call or something, which has happened. One found me through Twitter, which was shocking since I've only been on there for like a month and I'm not good with it. But, trying to build in flexibility so that if something like that happens, I don't miss an opportunity because I'm overscheduled. And then also having to work in day job time. So that's just right now for me, 2018 looks like attempting to be a really high quality time manager. And that is not a strong point. So, it's like coming out of the flu and going straight into something I'm uncomfortable with, but that's fine. Hopefully it'll keep my brain functioning as well as it can and all of that. But I have concrete plans. I certainly have like wishes and desires for this year, but at this point it's just to get going and really, notice that it's a new year rather than just being in bed with the flu.
And for people who want to write books or essay collections, memoirs, whatever it may be, and then it comes to fruition and they're wondering maybe what the process is like to start promoting the thing, getting together a somewhat of a book launch, even for authors who are maybe like low to mid tier or just starting. A lot of that work is on your shoulders. So what has that experience been like so far as you're looking to sort of, fill up those dates on the calendar, but also maintain that flexibility you were talking about?
It's been a tremendous learning experience. It has also been somewhat frustrating at times, but also really worked out well at different times. I have been a professional writer for years, so I have, having worked at newspapers, magazines, and that sort of thing, I've built a lot of contacts over the years. I'm generally not a bridge burner, so I can go back and, contact people I worked with in Atlanta 10 years ago, and they're actually like happy to hear from me. So,
Right.
It's a good lesson in like, I'm not a natural bridge burner, but if I were, I think I'd be in a lot worse shape right now. My publishing company they have a marketing department. They do their thing, but I've really just made myself a mission to do everything I can separately from that. So the thing that I'm really behind in is a Twitter or Instagram presence. Twitter almost put me in the grave, I think. When I first got an account, I was so overwhelmed by everyone's thoughts and just felt inadequate in every possible way. So I took Twitter off my phone, and I still look at it on a laptop, but only once or twice a day, and that's been helpful. But as far as marketing, it has been nonstop, updating blogs, using contacts, taking any opportunity that comes my way, answering people promptly, and really just working it. I mean, there have been some great surprises. There have been some times where not at all that I felt like someone should do something for me, but let's say you have someone from your past who you were really close with at one point, and they are in a position to help you in some way, and you go looking for that help, and it's a wall of silence, and that can be, I could let that upset me a lot more than I have, but instead I just try to focus on the things that have come through that were wonderful surprises. But as far as advice to someone who is, having to do a lot of this on their own, I would say make sure you have an online presence, if possible, before your book is published. And also don't be afraid to ask for things, because a lot of people really are open to some ways you may not even think of to helping you promote your book. But if you don't ask, they don't even know that you want their help.
How do you think you were successfully able to get your book published, given that you didn't have as big an internet footprint as maybe you had hoped or are advocating for?
I don't know that there's any conventional story for getting a book contract, but my story with that is I was teaching at a junior college, and I was working 11-hour days, and I had decided for the millionth time in my life that I was forsaking writing and that it just wasn't worth it and whatever. And I did have an anthology, an essay published in an anthology, and I didn't really think that was going to be my swan song, but I did feel like, all right, this is it, at least for now, this is it. But that editor called me while I was teaching, and it was lunch break, and we talked for a while, and she said, do you have any books you're working on? And I did, sort of. I think every writer does. But I also knew at that moment that that was an opportunity to say yes to if that's what I wanted to do. And so I did say yes, and that turned into writing a book proposal, and just full steam ahead really came on fast after that. And so I never really pitched this book to a bunch of different places. In fact, I only pitched it to the place where I got a contract. So it was... what was helpful to me is I have written for a lot of magazines and newspapers. I did have recent publication experience, and I knew how to write a book proposal. So it looked good. Whether it was as tight and wonderful as it should have been, I don't know, but I knew how to do it. So I think that those things, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but I definitely did not let anything overwhelm me. And as things started happening, I responded quickly. I didn't really give myself the time to think about, well, I should have a Twitter account or I should have this. It was just like, here's an opportunity. I live in a small town in the deep South. It's not like I run into these types of opportunities, on my daily coffee break or something. So I went for it, and I don't recommend anyone else go about things that way, but I don't really know a way they should go about things. I think it just happened. I worked for it, it happened, and I said yes to it when it happened.
And so what did that pitch look like for the book you're touring with now? And of course that'll be in the introduction, so everyone will know what we're talking about at this point. But like, how did that pitch look, and how long was this book about your fight with chronic pain gestating before you wanted to actually put it into writing?
Well, I started blogging about chronic pain stuff. One night I was at the gym, and I was so tired of hearing myself say things like my back hurts. And I was like, if I'm tired of this, I'm sure my wife is tired of this. And it was somewhat in the interest of marriage preservation to start a blog, because I thought, if I can just put this out to the ether, then at least I'm not putting it in her face all the time. Because when you live with someone who has a health problem, it is in your face. So at least if I could talk about it less with her, I thought that might give her a nice break. And so I was at the gym, and I just came up with the idea for a blog, in part to stay married. And so I started that blog, and after probably a year of doing that blog and actually making some money on it, which is, I can't say unheard of, but I don't know too many profitable bloggers nowadays. I think that was a booming business years ago and not so much anymore. But I realized there was a big audience for people who have chronic pain and who have tried various things that do and do not work, and to share their thoughts and stuff. And so I think probably within a year of starting that blog, I thought this could be a book. But I didn't say it will be, and this is how I'm going to do it. I just said to myself, this could be. And so it really planted the seed itself, I guess. And then I was interviewed by Runner's World magazine's online version a couple years ago. And that really watered that seed, because there was a tremendous response to it that I did not expect. I didn't know what that would be like. I mean, it was another one of those opportunities where it comes your way and you say yes to it. And so I did. And I really didn't have an expectation. It happened very quickly. And when the interview went live on their website, it got a huge response on their Facebook page. And that's really when I was like, okay, there's an audience for this. People are interested. I may or may not be able to help someone by telling my story, but that'd be, an extra added wonderful thing. And so it was cooking in the back of my head, but I cannot say I was truly working for it as a book. It was more like it was taking shape whether I wanted it to or not.
With any memoir, and especially something that is so laser focused as this book is, there's always that challenge of like, well, how can I make this a little bit bigger than me and my own story? And then how do you carry that that ethos with you as you're writing the thing. That is ultimately about you, but it's got to be bigger. Otherwise, no one's going to pick it up, buy it, and read it. You had the fortune of having that interview and seeing like, oh, there's this audience that could potentially want this. So, how did you go about crafting the book so it wasn't self-indulgent, but actually did provide value to this audience that you discovered after that Runner's World interview?
Well, I can definitely say that certainly bigger than me and my story has been what's hitting the news lately about the national opioid crisis. And I think that has really started a national conversation about pain pills. And I don't know that it's truly started a conversation about pain. It seems that most of the reading that I've done is geared toward these people are addicted, here's how it happened, and it's a huge problem. And there's not really a whole lot of digging into why are these people, of course, not everyone necessarily started because of such, but why are these people in so much pain? How has our modern medicine failed them and gotten them to the point that they would be on opioids? It seems like the conversation is more like, what do we do now that they're on opioids? And so for me, having objected to the opioids I was prescribed for years and, having gone that route to a certain extent and it didn't work out very well, that I realized is an exploding story in this country. And so even though it's my story of going through these things, I think there are a lot more people in our lives who've been hurt at work, who've had back injuries from working around the house, or are just old injured athletes, or have something degenerative. I think that we have a more sick and injured population than we realize. And that helps expand my audience because for the most part, everyone I've spoken with, if they aren't affected by something chronic pain related, they know someone who does, even if it's a little bit peripheral, like their second cousin has a fused back and can't work anymore or whatever. I think there is an unfortunate large audience for this stuff. And then as far as really trying to keep the writing from being self-indulgent, first of all, I hope I succeeded.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Okay, that's good. Because, you never know. I think we can self-police all we want, but at the end of the day, what I think about what I wrote is probably not what someone else thinks. So thank you for that.
Of course.
But I think definitely for me, starting the book by describing how I got hurt and really trying to set the scene of being at work and how it happened, I was also, I think, setting the scene for myself to say, don't forget, this is not just a book where every sentence starts with, I feel XYZ. It was, the world is happening around me. There are much bigger things than me, and I'm trying to exist within it with these health problems. And I think that perspective, honestly, I think working as an emergency medical technician changed my entire life in so many ways that, at least for me, it was hard to be too navel gazing after that, because when you see things day in and day out that most people never experience, I just look at the whole world differently. And so I don't think I was capable of writing a book that was like, here's my story. I don't really care if it has anything to do with anything else. I just want to tell it. Mm-hmm. Having lived so many other people's stories on a daily basis through work, it was very hard to have that kind of self-importance. And, I guess that was just a life lesson that carried over into writing. And I'm glad that you think it worked.
To set some context for the book, and so people might have a better understanding of what it means to be hampered with chronic pain. How do you define it, and also maybe kind of describe the kind of pain that you're constantly under, the way you do in the book extensively, but maybe in a little bit here. How do you define it and make people understand what it feels like?
Well, I try not to be that Debbie Downer Saturday Night Live person. So the best answer I've come up with to date is to say to someone, think of a time when you were injured, whether you were an athlete or you were in a car accident, even if it was something as straightforward as a sprained ankle. Think about how much that one thing ruined your life, at least temporarily. Whether it was you had to miss the big game in high school or you couldn't enjoy whatever it was that you were used to doing because you were dragging a cast around on your leg or whatever, but just how one small sickness or one small injury can often be so life-changing and a setback, and that your way out of that is by saying, well, at least this is only for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. And instead, when you have something chronic, it's that same thing, except it's not just for 3 weeks and it's not just for 6 weeks. It's every single day.
How did you, over time, learn to overcome that feeling of, why is this happening to me, and that unfairness? Because the victorious stop before you got hurt was, and you still are, but you're dealing with the pain like this, very strong, athletic, you could do anything you wanted to, and then you were struck by something that was telling you otherwise for a long time. So, how did you overcome that feeling of unfairness?
I had to, for a survival coping mechanism, I guess. I've found no use for it. I can still descend into that pit if I allow it. I can get really irritated when I see people eating fast food and feeling like $1 million. And then I'm like, that's them. Good for them. If they want to go eat that and they still feel fantastic, that really has nothing to do with me. And I had to cut that bitterness out before it happened. And honestly, there was an element of bitterness at times. It would be like, why is this person able to run 20 miles? And if I run just one, sometimes, a disaster ensues. And that's no way to live. I just had to cut it out. It was conscious at first, and I never thought I had it worse than everybody else. I never thought that I was the one, the modern day Job or something, but I did get tempted and beyond tempted at times to, scream at the wall and say, this isn't fair and that sort of thing. And I really had to examine what fair is and what my definition of supposed to be is, because once I turned that corner from realizing that my ideal life or my ideas about what life should be are not necessarily what's supposed to happen just because I want it, that really helped. And I never fell victim to thinking that I had it worse than everyone else, but I did often. It's not that I wanted other people to have problems, but I didn't understand why they did not have problems and I did. And part of that too is recognizing what you see is not always what you get. I mean, you can see someone running 20 miles or whatever, and they may have tremendous issues that I know nothing about. So I think just realizing it was no way for me to live. I did not want to be a bitter person. I did not want to be a person who was constantly thinking about what I did not have. That stuff, those thoughts really helped, but I don't know that there was truly a moment that I was hit over the head where I said, I need to change my line of thinking. I just kind of got sick of myself. I got sick of feeling sorry for myself. I got sick of thinking about what I couldn't do. And honestly, on some days, that's still something I need to remind myself not to do. But for the most part, it's just a really unhappy existence to dwell on that sort of thing. And so I just choose not to. And I'm not perfect at it, but it's a choice. At least for me, it's a choice.
Would you say the worst days of it are behind you, or do you still have days that are every bit as bad as when it was you were still trying to find the right kinds of treatment for it?
Sometimes I really panic about the future, and part of that comes, I think, from having worked in a nursing home and seeing how human life can progress or maybe regress. definitely working in a nursing home affected my entire worldview of the future. But I don't know. With some of this stuff, if things are degenerative, they definitely do not get better with time. But I do think that medical advances are happening, and I'm currently on I can't even say if it's a waiting list. I don't really know what the state is doing, but Florida has approved medical marijuana, and I'm currently in the process of getting that. It's primarily a pay-to-play system, and I've paid, and I'm waiting. But I do have high hopes for that. I also think that relentless watching of online videos from different medical perspectives and being willing to try things has really helped me in terms of if something isn't getting better, I'll ask input from people here and then go home and watch hours and hours of videos and read hours and hours of articles about it to try to fix whatever problem is happening. So I don't know. I don't know if the worst is behind me, but I do think I have a better attitude and definitely a more educated brain to deal with whatever comes. But I think I might fear the future anyway. I might have been one of those people anyway. But definitely when you start having health problems, I think there can be a tendency to, at least for me, to think about, well, if I'm only this age now, what is going to happen 20 years from now? And often I have to stop and say, well, who's to say that I'm not going to step outside and get hit by a bus and there won't be 20 years from now? So why am I thinking about what it's going to be like when I'm 50 years old if I may not be 50 years old one day?
Talking about the videos or in articles that you could easily just be overwhelmed and just consumed by the content and also by the disease or condition that anyone has, and in your case, the chronic pain, you could just be swirling in that whirlpool forever and ever. So I wonder, how do you keep yourself from being consumed by it and still live the life you want to live?
I think that is also a conscious choice, but also whether it's a blessing or a curse, I don't know, but I get bored easily. So I have to go do things. I will stay up too late at night watching videos and things like that, but I really I'm watching them because I want to be out doing things. I'm not watching them because I just want to know more. I'm watching them because I want to fix various problems and go out and play again. So the boredom, and I don't know if it's a short attention span or just a desire to be moving around at all times, but I get bored and I want to go do stuff. And so that is self-limiting in terms of how long I can do any task. And it's very helpful.
And there's a point in the book where you write that sometimes, seeing someone else's improvement could be demoralizing as hell for you. And I think there's that undercurrent there of comparison and jealousy that you can often, that translates in what you were dealing with physically, but also something in the art world too, running your own race and looking over your shoulder. And something I always love asking people. And, I guess the first part is like, how did you cope with that demoralizing feeling of a person to person thing, dealing with whatever pain they were dealing with versus yours? And then maybe as a creator of art and writing, how have you coped with that degree of comparison and running your own race in that sense?
I still work in healthcare, and so I deal with injured people a lot and sick people and everything. And really recognizing and respecting that just because I may have in my head, oh, well, you only have a muscle strain, that's not even fair for me to say you only have whatever it is you only have. To you, that's really important. That's your whole life. It's ruining your life and you want it fixed. And so reminding myself to respect people with what they're going through, and to remind myself to, I can use my own perspective perhaps to be helpful to this person, but I have no right to use my own the things that have befallen me to like curse someone else's lack of fortitude with their strained muscle. That's just not, that's every bit as real to them as my health problems are to me. And so just remembering that every person has something happen to them that is always going to be very important to them because it's their body. That's been a good reminder. And as far as the art world and everything, I think I can't say most of us, but I think a lot of us will get these little flares of jealousy when we find out someone always has a bigger contract, or someone always gets bigger press than us, or it's the nature of life. I think we tend to covet things and to look at something, and rather than say, I have these 5 wonderful things that happened, it's more like looking at this other person and saying, look what they have. And I don't like that. I don't like feeling that way. I've really not found anything productive from it. And I feel like a little kid pouting if I get that way. And I can't stand that. So I just try to stop. It's almost like a slap myself in the face sort of thing. If I start doing that, I say to myself, like, this is just purely obnoxious, and just stop it. and that helps. And also helping other people along the way whenever possible. If I'm in a position to offer a connection to someone who maybe was, stewing in jealousy over some press that I got, I have no idea, whatever it is, that if I can help that person get closer to where they want to be, I feel better doing that than if I sit there and pout about what some other person got that I didn't get. But I guess it's just like so many things. That too is a choice, if you catch yourself, for me, if I catch myself doing that, I just say, stop, this is obnoxious.
And you said something earlier in the conversation that I really want to circle back to. And that was, there was a point where you had forsaken writing, and it was something I think everyone who does this line of work, most of us come to that road and be like, you know what, this is it. I'm going to finish what's on my plate, and then I'm done. And then it pulled you back in, and it turned into the book. What was that moment before, like, as you were saying you were forsaking writing, like, what brought you to that moment?
Well, I have visited that moment a few times. It's ugly every time it happens. I went to grad school pretty young, and when I was finishing grad school, I had an opportunity with a big name publisher and a really well established editor who was interested in my graduate thesis. And at the time, I was not capable of being as adult-like as I should have been. And I was having various personal crises that, when it's the sort of crisis when you get older, you look back and you say, my God, who cares about that? But at the time it was just, doom and gloom. And so rather than pursuing this relationship and potential success at that point in my life, I decided to change everything. And one of those things that I changed was to move back to Florida and go to school to be an emergency medical technician. So that was probably the first big time that I'd not only said I'm giving up writing, but I actually did it. And as far as giving you a good reason for why that happened, there isn't one. It was stupid and probably quite self-indulgent, in terms of thinking that my personal life that at that time seemed so catastrophic, to not be able to step out of that and say, this is temporary. But this opportunity to have this book published that was my graduate thesis is not temporary. I wasn't sorting my cards properly at that point. So I have already been down that hideous road, and coming back from doing something like that is interesting. I was working in a nursing home, and I just really kept thinking about writing, and it always felt like what I was supposed to be doing, and it didn't matter how hard I was working or successful or not I was in healthcare. I always had this nagging feeling that I was supposed to be writing, And not just because I'd spent money and scholarships on degrees for it, but because that's what I had always wanted to do. But I wasn't doing it. And so I started a different blog that has since gone away, thankfully. But I started a different blog when I was working in a nursing home. And that got me back to writing and having that feeling of being published, even though it was just on a blogging level. It was having work out there for people to see. And coming back to it, I don't know if it was harder than going into it the first time as a very young person, but coming back to it was harder for me. And one thing that was very sobering was realizing that I was making pretty good money in healthcare, and coming back to writing, I was not making good money. And at one point I was working in a nursing home part-time using a junior college degree for that job. And I was also working part-time at a college marketing department doing their writing, that was my first real get back in the door with this. And at the nursing home, I was literally making almost 3 times the amount of money per hour that I was making as a writer. And so, being older, especially owning a home, having real life responsibilities, that was a hard sell to myself to say, hey, let's take a massive pay cut and go pursue this thing. But I did. And the whole time I had it in my head, too, of like, I know what it's like to make better money, to have more stability, to have, a more solid career. And so I think probably dwelling a little bit on that, especially with the cost of our health insurance every month, it was finances, I think, played into it in terms of thinking maybe I should quit writing again, in part because we have a lot of bills due.
Yeah.
And I started freelancing again. I started picking up my magazine clients and stuff, and I realized I was getting paid nowadays the same thing I was getting paid in college, and that was good money in college, and it's really not now. So definitely, I guess adult responsibilities played into the idea that I should quit writing again. But I really just decided at the end of the day that I didn't want to have another round of looking back and saying, what could have happened if I had really tried for it to happen? So that's where I am now, is actually trying.
Yeah. How have you struck that balance between trying to do the writing that you want to do that's satisfactory, also tries to make a little money on itself, but also striking that balance between the day job too? Because I think there's a tendency that people think like if their sole income isn't coming from the writing, that they feel like a loser, like they're kind of a failed writer, that they actually have to fill in the holes with something more steady. So I wonder, like, how have you struck that balance?
I'm continuing to attempt to strike that balance. It is definitely, again, living in a small town in the Deep South, there really aren't a lot of writing opportunities for professionals just like around me on a daily basis. So I don't live in a city, for instance, like New York, where maybe you walk out the door and you see people with these writing jobs that you wish you had. There isn't one of those there. There's not even one. It's not like New York where there might be 50 magazines where you wish you worked. There's not even one job here that I wish I had that I don't have. So I think that's a little bit helpful. But also it's definitely, it's a fight, I think, to justify sometimes what can seem, at least to me, like I'm not pulling my weight in the household or something. If I'm working fewer hours in healthcare and that means my paycheck is smaller, well, our driveway is literally like crumbling and we back the camper into it and it bottoms out and we need a new driveway. And it's such a boring thing, but that's what homeownership is. And so, I will think like, I really want to go do this thing related to my book, but I'll get paid X amount of dollars versus going to work this whole week in healthcare where I will be paid a lot more. And meanwhile, I feel like I'm going on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride when I pull into the driveway. And so it's definitely a push-pull. But I did consciously decide that at least for now, I'm going to try to make my book as successful as it can be so that I don't ever have to look back and say I didn't try.
Right.
And just go from there. And that is one thing about healthcare also. I don't want to sound arrogant at all. It's not what I mean. However, those jobs are always available because healthcare is a huge business in our country. Mm-hmm. So I don't have quite as much risk walking away from a job in healthcare as someone might walking away from something maybe at a bank or something. I don't know. I've never worked at a bank, but you know what I'm saying? It's like I know I can walk back into healthcare at any point that I want to. It will always be there, and it may not be the ideal job when I walk back into it, but there will be one available. And so it's a little bit of a safety net, which I do have to be careful doesn't keep me from trying to fly as high as I can, but it is a nice safety net too.
So when you're deciding to take up, writing true stories, who are some writers that you were looking to as you were trying to develop your own style and so forth that really inspired you to pick up the pen and try to accomplish what they were accomplishing?
Well, I started out in high school on the literary magazine, and I really, really respected my high school teacher who did that magazine. And that was kind of one of those early lessons in just trying to learn from somebody who was way better than me. But I've never been a big reader of nonfiction. I know that's ridiculous. I'm more of a novel reader, and I just like good writing. I don't really care too much about genre. If I'm like the person who goes to the bookstore and just turns over the covers and reads the back regardless of what section I'm in. I did see the true way I really got into nonfiction was in undergrad, and recognizing that the not easiest, but most accessible way to have a true paid career in writing was to be a journalist. And obviously, if you're a journalist, you're supposed to tell the truth. So that was how I really got into the nonfiction track, was recognizing, hey, this is where the jobs are.
Right.
But, and after that, it was just pretty much admiration of teachers that I came across who were just awesome people and had really done some cool things. But I was not a good journalist. I did not do well with hard news. I liked feature articles. And I think I'm probably better suited to writing fiction now that I've written my nonfiction book. I don't know if it's one and done nonfiction wise, but probably so, because when I do look at other work that I really admire, it's often fiction, and I don't really know exactly why, but it just is.
And how do you vet out your stories, or how do, what is your taste? What does your taste gravitate towards, and to vet out those stories that then you want to pursue and put a lot of time into?
At the moment, if I get an assignment from a magazine editor, I do what I'm told. Mm-hmm. But I'm interested in the outdoors. I'm interested in healthcare. Those kinds of true stories of what's happening in the world. I'm always fascinated about what's going on with our planet and what's going on with our health. But as far as truly pursuing those stories, I'm just not a good journalist in terms of that. I will often find something and I'm like, my God, this is a fascinating story. I hope somebody really good writes about this, because I don't want to. And that's, kind of with the career in the past when I was a full-time journalist, I don't think I was really that great at being a go-getter. I think I was pretty good at, the editor tells me what story to write and I did it.
Right. Yeah. There's a certain bulldoggedness that to be like a true hard news reporter you need. Definitely something I lack. I'm terrible at hard news.
Me
Never
too.
liked it. It just didn't appeal to me. I just couldn't get into that. And so I totally understand where you're coming from. Like, my taste is more to just kind of simmer and take my time with things and parachute in and spend a lot of time, not to swoop in and swoop out. So I totally get where you're coming from there.
Okay, good. Because I was like, I don't know that I'm that good of a nonfiction writer. And I think that's probably one reason that my nonfiction book is largely my own story, because that's the story that I'm forced to live, is the one that I am living. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that it was easy to write, but I didn't really have to go pursuing that story. That story was already happening.
Mm. And you've mentioned that that reporterly stuff is something you kind of struggle with historically. From a craft perspective, what else do you feel like that you struggle with, that you really have to work through and kind of grind through to get through to something that comes out the other end that is nice and palatable for a reader and for yourself?
Organization, 100%. That is the most awful weakness I have. The house is covered in piles of papers. I am not a good roommate. We have a dog who is in the perpetual puppy stage, and sometimes she'll grab a piece of paper and I just panic because I don't have important papers are not put away like they should be. Important notes are not where they should be. And if the dog gets a piece of paper, I don't think, oh, it's just a grocery receipt or something. I'm like, oh my God, it's like a month of research that she's eating. Right. So I don't know if there is a gene for that. I don't know if that is a skill I have just been completely bullheaded and unable to learn, but I extremely wish that I could be more organized. And I don't really have a problem with any other aspect of writing, but that is a huge aspect of writing. And I have made my own life much harder just looking for something or not remembering what I named a file on my computer and just being stupid about that. I would really like to improve that, but I've read, different methods and stuff, and I still look around right now and there are piles of paper everywhere. So I would really like to change that, but not sure how.
To make you feel better, like just looking at my shitstorm of a desk, I've got an important legal notice, a sort of a recall for something potentially defective on our car. Here's a jury duty summons, a pile of 15 books, unopened markers, an entire. So yes, to give you I know where you're coming from. I think you and I have a similar gene when it comes to organization or disorganization, as it were.
Yeah, it's horrendous, and I always want to fix it. And I actually really got myself into trouble with myself writing this book because at one point it was not in order. Really, it was almost like a series of essays, and I was like, no problem. And then I was like, oh yeah, actually this is a huge problem, because I was having to go, it was like trying to go organize the task after the task was done.
Oh yeah.
And my book was done and would have been done even sooner, like really done, if I hadn't done it that way. But I wrote it the same way that I live, which is in piles. And it was just really stupid. And I will say that the next book that I write I'm not going to allow that to happen. I say that now. I really hope I don't allow that to happen, because that was a huge pain.
Yeah, the one time I was rigorously fact-checked for an article I wrote, it was pretty terrifying because, the editor was like, okay, she was very great about it. She's like, okay, where did you get this? Where did you get this? And I'm just like, oh man, I had to dig through like tons of stuff. I'm like, fortunately I did have things kind of in binders. So the stuff was in there, but I couldn't remember if I had gotten it from the interviews I had done or if I had pulled it from an article that I had read and curated into this binder. So it was just like hunting and digging around, where it should have been really easy to find if I had been more organized. But it was like, oh man, like I hope I can find the source for this, because I'd hate to have to excise that from the text because it's good stuff. And I know I didn't make it up, but I need to prove that I didn't make it up.
Yeah, and were you like totally on the warpath that day? Because I like fly into a rage at myself when that happens.
Yes.
And then that's super frustrating too, because you know that you've like caused your own problem. But yeah, I don't know how to fix it. If you come up with something, please tell me.
Yeah, I was going around like warpath is right, and it was just like this total like self-flagellation, just like you are a moron. Why can't you be better at this? No one else is like this. You are a total failure. And this total like, it was awful. It was like a nervous dog chewing on his tail, and it was it was terrible. It was terrible. But
yeah, I don't know if we have any hope to fix that, but you would think that these times where we end up punished for it, even if it's just self-punishment, that would be enough. But I mean, like I said, I'm looking around going, in this room, I can tell that I haven't changed.
Yeah. And I tell you, the thing, if I'm like really stressed out pretty much, if I'm almost always stressed out for one reason or another, but what makes me feel great is if I'm able to just get rid of something. Like decluttering is like therapy to me, just to be like, all right, I've got these books here. I've read them. I'm not going to reread them. Time to donate them to a used bookstore or the library. And like, I just feel like a weight lifts off me if I'm able to get rid of shit.
Yeah, I do and I don't. I think I might have a hoarding tendency because I also panic. I'm like, well, what if I need that one day?
Right.
And it's irrational. I mean, I'm not going to need whatever that is. It's like, I don't need it. And if it's just sitting in a pile, obviously I don't need it. But I think there's like a certain comfort to stuff being around. But, you know, not living alone, I do have to keep it in check. And maybe that helps our personality types that we don't live alone, because I'm not really sure what kind of squalor this place would look like if it were just me, but I think it'd probably be pretty bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Our place would be just a total nightmare if it weren't for Melanie, and I'm sure Rhonda for you.
Jeez. Well, you know, God love them for putting up with it.
Yeah, no kidding. I was going to say, oh yeah, you mentioned that, you gravitate towards it just from your reading taste, like to novels and fiction. Who are some of those writers that you turn to and look to and, you're like, oh man, if I work real hard and I could write a real cracking sentence, like fill in the blank. Who are some of those people that really sort of like turn on your writer sensibility and your reader taste?
They're all over the map. I can tell you that the first time my mom took me to a B. Dalton bookstore, which I'm pretty sure is nationally out of business. It's certainly out of business here, but she took me to B. Dalton when I was 11, I think, and was finally like, okay, I'm tired of you reading through these kids' books so fast. You can get something from the adult section. And it was wonderful. It was like just so freeing to be able to go look at longer books that were, to me at least, more interesting. And the one that I chose was called Postmortem, and it was Patricia Cornwell's first book in what became her extremely successful Scarpetta series. And I took that book home, and it was like the world just cracked open for me, because it was so unlike anything I had ever read before, and it was so awesome, and I just couldn't quit turning pages. And I remember at that point thinking, I want to be Patricia Cornwell. And she was starting to get successful then, but that was her first major novel. And so she wasn't the megastar that she is now, but I already was like, this woman is awesome. And, I would beg my mom every time one of her books came out to take me back to B. Dalton and buy me one. And she was pretty agreeable to that. So that was good. And as I got older, I was pretty obsessed with the Dykes to Watch Out For series, which is comics, but the author, Alison Bechdel, put them together in books, and she eventually wrote a couple of graphic books also that were just incredible. But I really love that cartoon strip, and I don't know if that speaks in part to my short attention span, but I felt like she could encapsulate these awesome, relatable stories into just a few cartoon frames, and it was incredible. Or comic frames, I guess. And my favorite book as I guess middle school age was The Silence of the Lambs.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't allowed to see the movie, so it was purely the book that I was obsessed with. And then, of course, as we all often did, I think at that age, there was a friend who had HBO, and it's like, uh-oh. And so I did end up watching the movie, I think, in 7th grade, and it was horribly violent, and I was scared to death, even though I'd read the book. But I still have these books that I'm talking about, like Postmortem and The Silence of the Lambs. I still have those paperback copies from B. Dalton from when my mom bought them for me in middle school. They're in my room right now, and they've been with me through at least 10 moves and different states and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I have a long list. I'll spare you the rest of the list, but there have definitely been a lot of authors who I'm just blown away by, and I don't know that I could ever hope to write like them or have their success, but it'd be nice.
Right. Well, that's you said to spare me the whole list. Well, why don't you give me a couple, maybe three to five more off that list that really, that you're just really drawn to and inspired by.
Definitely the novella called Push by Sapphire. And that became a movie too, and I didn't ever see that movie. But I read that in one day in a friend's apartment in New York City, and I found myself having to remember to breathe. I mean, I would literally go between sentences and be so blown away by that work that I was almost like not breathing. And that is something, it's been years since I read that book, and I still think about it almost daily. It was just awesome. Okay, I have a nonfiction one for you. Stephen King's On Writing.
Yeah. Brilliant.
That's the only craft book, I guess, I've really ever loved. And I think in part because his story was so fascinating, and it was definitely part memoir, part how-to, part memoir. That one was just awesome. And then Homecoming, which was a young adult novel by Cynthia Voigt. I think that's how you say her last name. It looks like Voigt to me. But that was partially read aloud to me in 5th grade by a substitute teacher who was awesome. And that story, I quickly, after, the sub went away after a couple of months or whatever, and the regular teacher returned, and she wasn't nearly as exciting, and she didn't read to us. And so, there's like tugging on my mom's shirt again, like, can I go to the bookstore? And I got that book, Homecoming, and that over the years, that story has been so incredible to me. And even though it was a novel, and as many novels are, you could look at different things and say, oh, well, this isn't truly plausible in real life if you thought about it. But it felt like it was to me. And I recently reread it just a couple of months ago after not having read it since 5th grade. And it really blew me away in different ways than it had as a kid, because, of course, I missed a lot of the emotional nuance stuff as a kid and was more into the adventure of it. But those are some. And like I said, I could keep going forever if you wanted me to.
So when you were writing Hurting Like Hell, what was your routine for generating the work as to get yourself into that frame of mind, when you were waking up in the morning, and how you started generating those pages? Like, how did you set up your days so you were having a good day of work with it?
Well, the first thing I did when I was negotiating through the contract process and all of that was going on and the deadline discussions came up, I chose a really tight deadline. And one reason that I did that was to make sure that I got it done efficiently. I didn't want a huge span of time. I didn't want to be able to say, oh, I have something else I'd rather do today. I wanted to set myself up to have to work every single day. And that worked. But I was also teaching a lot and at the community college, I was teaching health science classes. So it was totally unrelated to what I was doing. But that really helped me to have to budget the time that I did have to work on it, because the deadline was coming. You know, it was kind of like the train through the tunnel where there wasn't, if I was really going to meet the deadline, and I did, but if I was really going to do that, I was going to have to get it done. There was not an option to procrastinate. And I found that the local college library was about as quiet as a library gets. And I did a lot of work there, but I ended up, we have a little pop-up camper, and I would take it to different parks and use it as an office because I can't stand noise and distraction. And so I had this like 2-wheeled mobile office that I would drag behind my truck and set up somewhere and work in the camper and kind of barter with myself. Like, if you get 500 words done, then you can go for a run. Uh-huh. And so I would do that. And like, I was staying at the National Seashore in the camper, and I would say, all right, you have to do 500 words before you go hiking. And then after I came back, I would say 500 more words and you can go to the beach. And that sort of bartering really seemed to help. And definitely working in the camper was awesome.
That sounds really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It did flood once, and that was not awesome at all. But we got that taken care of. But that was a fantastic decision that I will definitely repeat in the future, of using that as the office.
When I've had several conversations with Bryn Jonathan Butler on the podcast. He's just a brilliant writer and does a lot of. He's got a book coming out in chess later this year, but he's like a boxing writer. He's just one of those guys you could turn him loose on anything, and he's just brilliant. And he said that his worst ideas come at the keyboard, so he has to go for long walks or play with his cat or anything of that nature. And how important is it for you to be going on hikes or runs to help detach, but also stay? This is going to sound weird, like detach from the work, but in a weird way, get more connected to it by stepping away from it.
I don't think it sounds weird at all. That is so massively important. And that's one thing that's very hard for me when I'm unable to run because of my back or neck, because walking just doesn't do the same thing for me. I really need to be running for a long time and very hard. And that is, it comes up in the book different times. But I can't live as a sedentary person anyway, but as a writer, if I were forced into a completely sedentary life, I'd probably never write again. Because it is just, I don't like it to be a task for me. It is usually a creation that involves moving my body. And I don't know why, if it's, an oxygen shortage or what, but I don't really I write it all in my head when I'm walking, running, or hiking, but primarily running. And then I can keep it in my head for a couple of hours, but I do have to find a keyboard pretty quickly after I go for a run. But absolutely, physical activity it's like one of the hugest, most important parts of any sort of writing process for me.
And in the last few years or so, do you have like a belief or behavior or habit that has improved your work or your life to help you get the work done?
Not really. Probably getting the camper. That's been wonderful. It really has been, because it's not a space of my own at all, because we still go camping and use it for what it's meant to be used for. But it can become a space of my own pretty quickly. And if I'm in the house and trying to work, I will find a million reasons to, let the dogs in, let the dogs out, decide I need to eat again, even though I've already eaten, whatever it is, there's some sort of distraction. But definitely going towards solitude and away from excuses has really helped me. I went on a 2-week retreat last year that was completely funded. Otherwise I never could have just, gone away for 2 weeks, but it was so awesome. And I was in this cabin by myself for 2 weeks in Pisgah National Forest. And I mean, there were things that needed doing, I had to cook and be a responsible human, but for the most part, it was like, I just hiked and wrote and ran and wrote and hiked and wrote. And It was such an ideal existence. I did have a couple of moments of a Shining-like experience, but 2 weeks is a long time. But for the most part, like just being in the woods, being active, and getting the work done, it makes it not even feel like work. I mean, I literally still wake up and I'm like amazed at what an awesome job it is to be a writer, how fantastic it is to be an author, to be getting paid to do this stuff instead of, cleaning off a dead body and dragging it down to the morgue. And I've done that. I mean, I've made minimum wage to wash dead people and take them to the morgue. So to be doing better than minimum wage and not be dragging dead people to the morgue, it's incredible. It's just, this isn't hard to me. And I would totally become that person living out of a camper and writing if I didn't really like my friends and really love my wife.
Yeah. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, and I think anyone, maybe I'm overextending myself. I know that being unorganized makes me feel overwhelmed, and you identifying as an unorganized person, maybe you're the perfect person to answer this question. So when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do, or how do you get back on track?
Well, it's usually, as you probably know, it often involves putting a fire out because there is something lost that must be found or the whole world's going to stop. Yeah. So, I have to put whatever fire out that I've stupidly started. And once that happens, I always make the vow that I then break, which is to never be this disorganized again. But I will say that with marketing the book, I've been treating myself more like it's the 1990s again, and I have this giant poster on our refrigerator that I have used Crayola markers from my childhood on to make columns and rows, and it's like an accountability poster for marketing. And so if I have an idea, it goes in one column, and then, how it was pursued, dates it was pursued, and outcomes are in other columns. And as totally low tech as that is, it's wonderful. I mean, I go to get something out of the refrigerator and there's this spreadsheet essentially of all these tasks that need working on or that have been completed. And that's been extremely helpful. So if I can maybe translate the 1990s style chart to the rest of my life, that would probably be great. But that chart, I cannot overstate how wonderfully helpful to me as a completely disastrously disorganized person. That chart has been like a lifeline.
What kind of self-talk have you used or do you use to motivate yourself when you're down or when you're in a creative funk? Like, what are those conversations like with yourself?
I don't really have problems with creative funks. I have more, and maybe that is one gift of having a lot of health problems, is my funks purely come from, I feel like shit, I can't move, I literally have to have help getting out of bed. And so when I feel pretty good or really good or even mostly okay, I'm just so glad that I really don't have, I guess anything similar to creative funk comes for me when I have to wait. So if I have to wait for, like right now, I'm waiting on the results of a couple of awards that I entered my book in, and they don't respond till March. That I hate that. I want to know right now. Like, I want to ask you a question and be given the answer immediately. I don't like to wait. And that's probably as close to a funk I get, is just sitting around feeling like nothing's happening, because in publishing, a lot of things happen slowly. And the way I get out of that these days is by just doing something to make myself feel like something has gotten done. So there isn't this dead space and there isn't this time of like, I don't use it as an excuse. Well, I just won't do anything for the next 2 months because I get all this stuff that happens in March. I just won't. I make myself create something else to do.
And in terms of craft and habits, what kind of, or what can somebody do today to become a better crafter of these kinds of stories? And you might even be able to expound upon something you were once weak at that you're now a lot better at because you put in some practice. So, like, what are some of those things that you think, people listening who might be who want to try to elevate their game, that how they can level up?
I'm a big fan of documenting everything, and I wish I were better at keeping journals. I've gone through phases with that, and it's really, if you're writing nonfiction, especially if you're writing about your own life or your own experiences, to have things like that to reference rather than relying on pure memory is really awesome. I recommend starting a blog, even if you don't expect a big audience and you don't know exactly what your focus is. That's from a business standpoint, that's disastrous. But from a writing standpoint, having things like blogs and journals to reference later, you just never know how that can end up being research for a book that you didn't even know was possible. I also am a huge fan of taking pictures of things to the point that it's probably obnoxious, but if I'm on my walk and I see, whether it's a flower or a snake or something that catches my eye, I bought my phone with extra memory because I take so many pictures of what a lot of people would probably consider just everyday minutia, but that helps me remember things. And then I don't have a question of, like, let's say for whatever reason, this red flower I saw becomes some integral thing later and I had no idea it would. Well, because I'm an obsessive picture taker, I can go back and look at the picture of that red flower and make sure that it really did have a yellow center and it wasn't just a figment of my imagination that it had a yellow center, and, just kind of helps bring back memories that way too.
Yeah. And what part of the process, writing or research or editing or rewriting, do you feel most alive or most engaged in or most engaged with?
The initial writing, that feeling of having gone for a run and coming home, and I just can't wait to get my stinking shirt off so I can sit down and write whatever is in my head on the computer. I love that initial, it's almost like a brain dump. Mm-hmm. It's like a weird physical response of relief and release and just feeling really good about it. So the initial writing of anything, especially that was created while running, that's absolutely my favorite part.
Mm. How long can you write in a day without getting fatigued?
Well, I did test that when I was writing this book because I did have such a short deadline. It went under contract in late September of 2016, and my deadline was April Fool's Day of 2017. So I did expand my definition of a long work day as a writer. But as long as I have breaks, physical breaks primarily, like get up, run, get up, hike, whatever, I can just go. I mean, I'm blessed with good vision. I don't have to wear glasses of any kind. I see other writers like rubbing their nose or whatnot because their glasses are heavy. I don't have that problem. And I can just, as long as there's a run or a hike or something every couple of hours, I'm just pretty much good to do it all the time.
And you've mentioned novels. What are some other artistic media you turn to, whether it's documentary film or feature film or podcast or radio, that you turn to for inspiration that might not be exactly what you're doing, but helps feed the engine in some way?
I love listening to music, and a lot of times I feel like if I could write a book that is as good as a lot of the songs I listen to, then I'd really be in business. I feel like a good songwriter can tell more in a short song than a lot of us can do in 300 pages. But I don't listen to music while I write because it has to be pretty silent. But definitely, admiring songwriters is huge. I read a ton of internet articles and magazine articles just to have other people's thoughts, in my head and kind of planting seeds for things I most want to do. But I think creatively, my everyday strongest influence definitely is music.
And do you keep a notebook or a log of stories that you want to write about eventually?
Yes, I do. And that is one part where being disorganized is a disaster yet again.
The dog could have it in her mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she could. And she would. And she will ingest it. She doesn't just kind of tear at it. So I have several notebooks where that, there are different ideas and things like that. And I even bought myself one of those ridiculous notebooks that is pre-printed to tell you, here's your idea, here's your date that you executed it and whatever. And that didn't help me at all because I lost it. It's in this house in a pile somewhere. But I have a computer file that's, called something about, I don't know, I forgot, honestly, because I'm disorganized, but I think it's something about like book ideas. But I finally decided to run when I was on that writer's retreat last year. I did decide to run with 2 of the novel ideas that have been pestering me in my brain for years. And so they actually have their own files. They are being written. They've been printed. They have their own binders. They're actually coming to fruition. But yes, all over this house, there is stuff that, I really kind of thought one day, oh my God, if I die, poor Rhonda, my wife, is going to have to clean all this out. I was thinking, I wonder if she'll read this stuff or if it'll just go to the recycling bin or what. Because it's all over the house. If something strikes me and it has to be written down. The other day I was cleaning out my truck, which was an industrial excavation, and I found a pizza box. I don't even eat pizza. I eat ridiculously healthy, so I don't know whose pizza box this is or why it's in my truck. But on the inside flap, written over these grease spots, was a story I had written outside of the gym. And, the ink is running in the oil and stuff. And so I had to take that nasty pizza box inside and type up that story that, had I not looked in that pizza box, would have just been in our recycling bin. So yeah, I do keep track, but not very well.
And what is so, inevitably, you've had these periods of when you've forsaken writing and then, you come back to it. And what is it about it that keeps bringing you back?
It's kind of, I don't want to say a need, because that's probably an overstatement. A need is, we learn, food, water, shelter, that sort of thing. But it's almost like that. Whenever I have stopped writing, I've never stopped writing in my head, and it just feels like I will hit a capacity where it has to come out. And so whether it comes out in the form of handwriting on a pizza box, or it comes out in the form of a book that goes under contract, it just feels like, I don't know if this is so gross, that's all I can think of, is almost like a pimple that really needs to pop, where you just feel like, there's this thing, and I don't know exactly what this thing is, but it's full and it needs to be released. And so I think that feeling, I can almost feel like I'm toxic or something if I don't get the writing out. And like I said, I don't feel like it all has to be published or it all has to be shown to anyone, but it definitely, it does feel like some sort of almost primal need to get writing done.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate carving out the time, and thanks for your work. Thanks for writing the book, and I wish you the best of success with it. Where can people find you online?
See, there we go. I do have a Twitter account, but I wouldn't really bank on that one. I have the author website is myname.com, so it's Victoria Stopp with 2 P's.com. The blog that really started the book is called fibromyalgiaathlete.com. And I do have a Twitter account that is occasionally used if they would like to find me there. And then the book is online at Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And then if you Google me, I don't know what you'll find, but I know you'll find some of my articles and stuff too.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks again, Victoria. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, and thank you.
You got it. we've made it to the end once again. Thanks for listening, friends, and thanks to Victoria Stopp. Best of luck with the book. Did you know that I've got a monthly newsletter? It's true. I send it out on the first of the month, and it contains my book recommendations for the month, as well as what you might have missed from the world of the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Once a month, no spam, can't beat it. Just go over to BrendanO'Mara.com. Also, consider leaving an honest review on iTunes. You're already doing a lot by listening, but if you can spare a minute or two, I'd deeply appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Brendan O'Mara, and the podcast now has its own Twitter account at CNFPod. It also has a Facebook page, so if you want the full immersive creative nonfiction podcast experience, be sure to like or follow all the channels. That's going to do it, folks. Till next week, thank you for listening.